our eyes darting around the screen, figuring all of this out. So thank you so much, Marisa, for those reminders. And of course, as you have further questions around technology, feel free to shoot that directly to Gail, who can help, or to Marisa, who has kind of the ins and outs of Zoom on tap there. And it's my pleasure to introduce our key speaker this morning, which is Penny Brown. And Penny is with the Southwest Metro Intermediate District. And she's also a member of our Language and Literacy Advisory Team and has been, I believe, since the beginning of that team. So we're glad to have you. She's also a STAR trainer and has also worked extensively in reading instruction and in training others around evidence-based reading instruction. So she is a frequent presenter. You no doubt have seen her at a regional or a Language and Literacy Institute or Summer Institute. So we're so glad that Penny was able to work this into not an easy schedule lately with everything going on. So thank you, Penny, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It is nice. We have a really nice group today and a lot of people coming to us from places outside of Minnesota. So welcome to Minnesota virtually. It's nice to have you. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I have taught in adult basic education for over 20 years now. And I work in Shakopee, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. And the community has a large immigrant population from Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Spanish-speaking countries. Quite a working class community. We have a lot of industries such as Amazon and Shutterfly has warehouses in our community. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of maybe some of the students that you might see in my classroom. In my program, students will enter my class when they're reading at a 4.0 grade equivalent on a TABE M or higher. So sort of that intermediate/advanced reading level. My classes are a combination of native English speakers who have come through the American school system, and then many immigrants who are continuing to learn the English language. In the chat box, if you can take a moment to just do a brief description. I'm not going to be able to read through now, but later on I can go back and just give me an idea of your setting or your students. And later in the presentation, I'll be able to peek at that. I'll give everyone a moment just to chat at an introduction.
So Penny, those are starting to come through. I'll just mention Moorhead and Mankato, certainly the metro area as well. Someone's joining us from the Chicago area. Welcome, Laurie. Albert Lee, Roseville, Minneapolis. And there's a wide range of contexts and levels that people are teaching as well. Someone from the Virginia Adult English Center, Cass Lake. I'm going to miss some because they're coming in fast and furious now, but we are glad to have you. Someone in a jail setting, Mounds View, Northeast Regional Corrections. Someone's teaching refugees in Greece, so that's exciting. Vietnamese Social Services. Someone else in the Chicago area, Robbinsdale. So certainly all over Minnesota and beyond.
Okay, all right, that just gives me a little bit of feel for the audience today. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so the plan for today is we're going to have just a brief idea about maintaining classroom communities when we're teaching online or through distance learning. Then I have 4 classroom activities that we're going to do as if you were ABE students. My hope is that by the end of today, you'll have some ideas of something that may work either in your traditional classroom when you return to that, or something that might work for you as you're teaching online or through distance learning. Each of these activities is designed to help students build the reasoning skills they need to understand some of the more complex questions when they're reading text. Everything will be at the intermediate level today, but the activities can be leveled up or leveled down if you choose different text that is more appropriate for your class. And then we are reserving some time at the end of the session just to have some discussion and networking about what is working and challenges that we have having moved to a different type of teaching in the last 6 weeks. You will be participating a lot in the webinar today. We have a couple of situations where you'll work briefly in breakout rooms. We will have you reading aloud as if you are a student in an ABE classroom. We will have you answering questions and that type of thing too. So just be aware that we'll be using the chat and the hand raising and a lot of that today. And I will be calling on you and unmuting you as well. Okay, the first thing is more of just a thought that I've had in the last six weeks. My experience in adult education has led me to kind of believe that personal goals is usually what causes adults to enroll in our program. But becoming part of a classroom community, I think, is one of the factors that helps them persist in ABE over many months and many years. In a traditional classroom setting, I think it's fairly easy sometimes that classroom community just sort of is created organically. I think that can be a little bit harder on a virtual classroom. So I'm going to give you one idea that I have been using with my online classes. And then at the end of today, when we're doing more of a group discussion, if you have other ideas of things that have worked for you for maintaining a classroom community, I'd love to hear them. Okay. So the opening activity that we have in my online class is the game Two Truths and a Lie. Each student has a chance. Each day, one student is the subject of the puzzle. They email me 3 sentences about themselves. All of them sounds like they're believable, but one is indeed a lie. And then their classmates have to choose which one is incorrect. And that gives everybody a chance to learn more about their classmates, similar to the casual conversations they might be having in break or during work time on class. And for those of you who are curious about me, I have never had a goat. Okay. I was raised on the east side of St. Cloud, so I am definitely a city girl. Okay. Now I want to move into our first lesson. The lessons, each of the ones that we're doing are sort of mini lessons that would take anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes in a classroom, okay, in a larger class. The first activity is coming to, based on many of those goals in the CCRS that have to do with connecting text to graphics. And when I'm designing a lesson, I like to think about what are the thinking skills that my students will need to kind of to reach that goal and where they might have some difficulties. So in this lesson, I think that they have an opportunity to observe details in artwork, then identify details in text, and then work to connect the details in both pieces. I think we can also sort of inadvertently talk a little bit about symbolism and representing theme. So to begin the activity, I'm going to display a painting from Norman Rockwell that is rather famous. If you have been educated in the American school system, you are probably familiar with it. When I did this activity with my students, of the 25 students in my classes, 2 of them had seen the painting before and only one could name the subject of the painting. So we're going to display the painting and then we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And I would like you to talk about the details in the painting, okay? And try to put on hold any background knowledge that you have about the historical context of the painting and just focus more on the details in the artwork. You can take a picture of it on your screen if you want to do that, and then you can have it in front of you for the phone. We're also going to have a link in the chat box, so if you want to open up a second window and then be able to be looking at the painting as you do breakout room with your with some classmates. Okay. So this is the painting that we're going to look at. In the chat box, there will be a link, or you can use your phone to take it. And now I think that you will be sent to a breakout room for about 5 to 7 minutes, okay?
All right, we are ready, and you should see that link there to the painting. And so we are going to open all the rooms now. You'll get a 30-second warning once we're about ready to come back to the large group. Okay, it appears that we have everybody back. So we're ready to continue, Penny.
Okay. So all of the activities that we're doing today were activities that I originally did in my classroom, kind of paper-based activities. And then took time to sort of move them over to an online platform. And so this is the first time we're trying them as an online lesson. So we're going to take a look at some details now. I'll read the first paragraph. And as I'm reading, I would like you to think about what details in the text also show up in the painting. We know that artists spend a lot of time on a piece of artwork. There's nothing in a piece of art that is there by accident. So trying to think about why the details in the painting are there, okay? At the tender age of 6, Ruby Bridges advanced the cause of civil rights in November 1960, when she became the first African-American student to integrate an elementary school in the South. Okay, so I'll model this first one, and then in the following slides, you will join me in. So the text says that, there's somebody named Ruby Bridges who is age of 6. So the details of this little girl gives us an indication that she's 6. She's not a toddler, she's not an infant, but she certainly isn't a teenager. Okay, she's sort of on the younger end of childhood. This text is now giving us some background information. Okay, so we're in 1960, so some of the styles of the suits and the clothing that she's wearing gives us an indication of the time or the era that we're in. We know her name is Ruby Bridges. I think we can make the inference, since there's only one female in this picture, that is probably Ruby. And she was the first African-American student, which certainly is represented in her skin tone, and to integrate an elementary school. So Ruby is carrying what looks to be a ruler, a book, a notebook, perhaps a pencil. And she's dressed in what might be considered professional clothing for a little girl. She's in what could be considered school clothes, not play clothes. Okay, now I am going to begin calling on people. And I think I'm just going to start at the top of my list. So Elizabeth Bennett, you are the first person on my list after the presenters. Elizabeth, I have unmuted you. Will you read this paragraph to us, please?
Sure. Southern states continued to resist integration, and in 1959, Ruby attended a segregated New Orleans kindergarten. A year later, however, a federal court ordered Louisiana to desegregate. The school district created entrance exams for African American students to see whether they could compete academically at the all-white school. Ruby and 5 other students passed the exam.
Okay, so the question then is, what details, my box is covering my screen here. Okay, so what details in the artwork are connected to the text and how? And so I'm just going to keep going. Melissa Gross, are you there?
Yep.
Melissa, can you give us some ideas? What are some details in the text that you can connect to details in the artwork?
The resist integration, I guess the four gentlemen taking, looks like walking her. I guess I would say that would help with explaining the resistance.
So are the men in the picture the people who are resisting
No.
integration, or are they there for another purpose?
Well, I suppose they're there for another purpose, but
okay,
they're helping her.
Yeah, okay, but there's she's not able to walk to school on her own, right? Which is an indication of that. Okay, Nancy Deerdorf, any other details in this text that help us understand the artwork?
Just that this took place in 1959, which is why the clothes might look a little old-fashioned.
Yeah, it definitely gives us.
Yeah, kindergarten again.
Yeah, so it's giving us an idea of her age and the time that we're in. Okay, Laura Sherwood, any other details in the text here that helps us understand details in the painting?
Yeah, I apologize. I just took a phone call, so I didn't hear what else was being said. But the thing that I thought about was, you know, it was a federal court that ordered Louisiana to desegregate. And so that's probably why she's being escorted. You know, I just think this is an official thing. It's just not a little girl walking off to school. This is a big deal.
Yeah, and it's probably a little bit difficult to see, but I think the armbands do read U.S. Marshal, right?
So, and you can see the badge too.
And there's a badge, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's move on to the next slide. There's more that we could go, but for the interest of time, we'll just keep moving. Terry Burkle, can you read this paragraph to us? Oh, Terry, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. You want me to read the whole paragraph?
Yes, please, if you can.
The one about Ruby Bridges, the one that we just saw?
I did move the slide over. You seen one that says Ruby and her mother?
Nope, I don't have that slide.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's why I wanted to know if we wanted me to read it again, but.
Yeah, I see the correct slide, Penny. I'm not sure.
Okay, we might just be having a lag with the internet. Let me try a couple other people here, Terry, and just see if it's sometimes internets run at different speeds. So, Sandra Ecker, do you see a new slide?
Yes, I do. The first sentence. I see, it says Ruby and her mother were, and then there's two words I can't see. I'm guessing it's escorted by 4 federal marshals to the school every day that year. She walked past crowds, screaming vicious slurs at her. Undeterred, she later said that she only became frightened when she saw a woman holding a black baby doll in a coffin. Barbara Henry, a white Boston native, was the only teacher willing to accept Ruby, and all year she was a class of 1.
All right, thank you, Sandra. All right, so taking a look at that, if you have some words that are not appearing, it could be that your chat box is covering it and you are able to move your chat box around the screen. It could also just be that your screen is expanded, and I think there are ways to do that. But I also can provide any words there that you are unable to see. So just let me know that. Kelly Foltmer, can you tell me what details in the text are connected to details in the artwork?
Oh, well, it says the word undeterred, that she wasn't scared, and she doesn't look scared. She looks brave the way she's standing. Does that help? Is that right?
So yeah, no, I understand. What details about the way she's standing helps give that impression?
Oh, I see. She's walking with her chest forward. She's not hiding and bending forward, and her chin is high. Her pigtail is spry and perky.
Yeah, okay, I agree. Thank you, Kelly. Betsy Schroeder, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, Betsy, other details in this paragraph that connect to details in the artwork?
Well, in the very first sentence, it said that she's escorted by 4 federal marshals. And we assume that with their armbands on, even though I can't read it, and the one has a badge.
Yeah.
I would assume that you can count. There's 4 federal marshals there.
Yeah. And the one marshal has a document in his pocket
Yes.
that could be orders, okay, that they're under orders to do
yes.
something.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll call on one more. Laura Malat, any other details in this passage that help connect to details in the text?
Yeah, I saw the vicious slurs. We noticed that the N word was on there with the smashed tomato.
Yes. So very faintly, we have that word. We also have in the corner here another one. Both are words that definitely have emotional appeal and a lot of kind of an inflammatory nature to them. Back at that time as well as today. So it isn't something that's necessarily changed over that time. So we have the vicious slurs. The smashed tomato is also kind of giving us an indication of the tone of what's happening, right? Okay. Okay, let's try another one. Liv, can you read this one to us?
Sure. Over time, other African American students enrolled. Many years later, Ruby's 4 nieces would also attend. In 1964, artist Norman Rockwell celebrated her courage with a painting of that first day titled, "The Problem We All Live With."
Thank you, Liv. Okay, so I'll take this one. So some of the details that we're seeing here are things that we have seen in the other slides. What I like about this is kind of looking at that title. That's a question that we're going to kind of, I have at the end, but we can address now. Belinda, I'm going to unmute you. So Rockwell chose to call this the problem we all live with. And I think if a person was just in a gallery and walking by and looking at this casually, they might come up with a very different meaning of the artwork. Why do you think, what is the problem that you think that Rockwell is referring to? Belinda Jones, are you with us right now? Okay, she must have stepped away.
She's having some audio issues.
Fine. Let's go on to is it Deanna, and I can't see all of your last name. Persh, Deanna Persh.
Yep, I'm here.
Can you say your last name for me?
Partition.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so same question. What is the problem that Rockwell is referring to? What do you think?
I think like segregation or inequity.
Okay. Okay, and what are some details in the painting that make you think that?
Well, she is alone and separated. And it just looks to me like the men have more power just because they're adults. They're wearing some sort of uniform.
Okay.
And she needs protection, so she's not equal for a number of reasons.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, and there's a lot of different ways that on casual observation, we might come up with a different idea for the problem, okay? And there's more than one correct way to also answer that question. Let's just kind of wrap this one up. Karen Hattelstedt, can you read the next paragraph to us, please?
A lifelong activist for racial equality, in 1999, Ruby established the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote tolerance and create change through education. In 2000, she was made an honorary deputy marshal in a ceremony in Washington, D.C.
All right. And I'll just point out the detail that I kind of like about this one is that she's being escorted by U.S. Marshals, and then later on she becomes an honorary deputy marshal. Okay. Okay, so some of those reading skills that we can work on would be the 5 WH. So I'm, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go in depth to, you know, who, what, why, when, where, how. Both from the painting and the text, we can guide our students to finding those answers. But then a couple questions, and we can dig just a little bit deeper into that. And so many of our test questions, whether it's a TABE or CASAS or GED, does require our students to dig, you know, beyond that 5 WH. So what is Rockwell's opinion of Ruby Bridges? Julie Hawkinson, what do you think about, how does Rockwell feel about Ruby Bridges?
I think he's really honoring her in that picture. Just like the other gal said, she's standing really straight and tall. I mean, I don't know if he was working off a photograph or if this is just, you know, something from a newsreel or what, but anyway, he's showing how brave she is. And yeah, I think he's just really is impressed with her bravery.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely her posture. One of the other things that makes me also think that he's very supportive of her action is that this tomato splatter comes close to her, but her dress, her skin, and her clothing are untouched, right? And she is put in a white dress, which oftentimes symbolizes innocence, okay? So I don't think it's an accident there too. So again, this tomato, which is sort of a symbol of the tension and the fear and the hatred that is kind of driving this entire scene, it is off screen, but it sort of gives us an indication, okay, of the viciousness of the moment. It actually doesn't touch her, does it? Okay. Other messages that Rockwell might be communicating in his painting. I'm going to give you one example. One other thing that I notice is there is a gap between Ruby and the 2 guards in back. All of the guards have fists, which makes me think they're tense, and perhaps some of them are a little reluctant to do their job. Because of this gap, there has been the ability for the tomato to get through. This point, I'm going to give you just a moment. I think if you can chat that answer, and then that's something that I can look at later, because you may notice something that I haven't noticed, and that's one of the values in these kind of activities is sometimes our students help adjust our thinking as well. But take a moment, and are there any other messages that you see that Rockwell is communicating in that painting? Okay. Yeah, it's fun. I'm enjoying reading the comments and the things that you are noticing about the artwork. So as you finish your chat, our students were doing some reading, okay, but the focus on it wasn't a strategy necessarily or one specific skill. It was more about developing some of the reasoning skills that they need to bring to their reading, okay? And I think in our day of text message and Facebook news feeds and headlines, it is really important to give our students some opportunities to really look and read deeply, as opposed to getting just the main idea, okay? And so my hope is by doing these kind of activities, that reasoning skill will transfer over when they're reading more complex text. To transfer this lesson to online, I did need to take the text, which was one sheet of paper, and then I had ordered postcards from the Norman Rockwell Museum that contained the painting, and the students would work on them, you know, side by side on their desktop. So to make that adjustment to online, I did have to separate the text into smaller segments so they could view the details in the text and the artwork at the same time. So we're at the end of the first classroom activity. I'd like you to take a moment to jot down pros or cons or adjustments if there was something in this activity that you would like to use either in an online classroom or a traditional classroom. Jot down notes if you would need to, you know, adjust text or that kind of thing. And you don't have to share those are notes just for yourself. It's a reflection. And while you're doing that, I can take any questions that you sort of have about that, about my thought process or about the activity or that kind of thing.
Penny, there's a question in the chat. Where did you get the text, or was it something that you wrote?
No, I did a little bit of research for that, and I have it, the source is in the bibliography at the end. It was a short bibliography that came from Women's History Museum, or it was a source that I found. So no, I'm not I'm not writing up the text. It was a source that came from archives or museums. I can't quite remember the exact source, but the last slide in this presentation will have it for you.
Great, thank
Penny?
you. And then, go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to say there's another question in the text. Do you pre-teach vocabulary in the text? And if you do, what vocabulary do you pre-teach?
I normally don't pre-teach vocabulary in this type of activity. If the vocabulary becomes a barrier to the understanding, okay, then I'll address the words. But I find if I pre-teach a lot of vocabulary, then what should be a lesson about comprehension and reasoning can quickly get hijacked. The focus can change. Through discussion with my students, I can usually determine whether vocabulary needs to be addressed. Most of my students had no background knowledge. They just didn't have any historical context to this. So as a social studies teacher, I'm probably not doing right. Yeah, I'm able to introduce the concept to them, but I'm not, you know, going nearly as in depth to that era as I should be through just this activity.
Great. A couple other things in the chat box. A couple of comments that it was really helpful to be told to take a picture with the phone before we went into discussion. So if people are using Zoom and breakout groups, that might be something to know. You can't take the screen with you, of course, when you go into a breakout. So that's a good option if people have opportunity to either download it like we did with Marisa's help, or take a photo before going into breakouts. And then Megan said having a little bit of text at a time was helpful to not overwhelm students, and just having a little bit on the screen at a time was a good idea. We did have a question for you. What would be your next step with students after doing this activity?
This kind of was a standalone activity, but again, the overall sort of that CCRS anchor that we were working on was connecting text to graphics. So if I was to do this again with more planning time, what I probably would do is turn it into a part of a text set. Is it Tammy Twigs, I think is her last name? In Minnesota has done a lot of research on text sets. So a variety of different documents around a particular issue or a particular question. So what I would do is expand that, have this be one piece, okay? And then address whether I want to be addressing the topic of civil rights, or I want to be addressing more of like connecting artwork and history. I think there's a lot of ways you could go with that. But I would like to bring in other text and other forms of graphics. Yeah.
Christine, do you want to pose your question?
Sure, Penny, and you kind of partially answered it as far as talking about Tammy Twigs and her text sets, and having this be part of maybe a larger text set. And then would you have some kind of essential question at the heart of this?
Yeah, that's something that I personally in my practice just haven't gotten there yet. I love the idea of it though. I mean, there's something about that essential question that is just lovely for tying an entire unit together. So I would recommend that, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead then and move on to a second classroom activity. One of the things that my students struggle with a lot, like we use the TABE for our accountability test, and when I'm kind of going through that and finding where they're making errors, they tend to make a lot of errors around summarization. And as I start to really work with them and kind of try to observe their thought processes, what I'm finding that they tend to do is they tend to look to see if something is true or false. They tend to see whether or not they agree with what the author's saying. They'll look back to see if the exact quote that is being used in the question shows up in the text, or they'll tend to retell me every detail they can remember. What I'm really trying to do is adjust those thought patterns and help them work on distinguishing the difference between a key detail and a minor detail. And this can be done different ways. I know one of the evidence-based reading strategies has to do with the summary chart, and that works really well. This is another way to help develop that kind of thought process. Even though it's reading, a class based on reading, I do like to bring in other forms of media, and so developing this thinking skill can also be done by listening to speeches and then reading text from the speeches. So on the next activity, we are going to have you watch a 6-minute TED Talk. Many of you are probably familiar with this. Angela Duckworth did some research on the concept of grit, and that laid the foundation for the kind of philosophy of the growth mindset that we're hearing a lot about now. So we're going to have you listen to, just listen to her TED Talk, and then after that, we're going to do an activity with the content of her TED Talk. There might be a little bit of lag due to the internet. Her TED Talk is closed captioned, so if her mouth is not matching the words and you find that annoying, feel free to mute and then you can just read the closed captioning, okay? All right, so I'm gonna cue this up.
Penny, we're not hearing that.
There is no sound. Oh, shoot. Oh, I can fix that. One moment. I thought I had it set. All right, we will try again.
And like any teacher, when I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding.
Yes.
Teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I know that video was not ideal. I was hoping that the quality would be a little bit better. Even if a student wasn't able to hear that video, the thought process that I'm trying to practice with them can still work, okay? So the first thing that I would do is we would just sort of go through. The topic of our TED Talk is grit. We would talk about how all of the details keep coming back to the concept of grit. And these other 4 things are sort of details that support the notion of grit. Would also sort of give the students the main idea of this text or of her TED Talk was that grit predicts future success and we need to learn how it develops. Once students have the topic and the main idea, I lead them through a guided practice activity. So I would have done some work with them on the past, okay? Talking about that a key detail is a detail that directly connects to the main idea. Where a minor detail connects to the topic, but it is more likely giving us background knowledge, giving us history, or providing human interest. Okay. So in my traditional classroom, if you've ever been in my classroom or you've done another training I've done, I'm very partial to something called sorts. What I would have done in a traditional classroom is I would have had each of these sentences on a separate piece of paper, and then on their tabletops, the students would have to sort them between a key detail or a minor detail with their partner. And the reason why I take the time to do all that cutting up is I have found that when a student is working with a partner and they're physically moving something, they're more likely to explain why they're putting it in that column as opposed to if it's just a matching activity on a worksheet, okay? And the importance of explaining that why is building those academic conversations where the students then begin to learn the thought processes from their classmates as well. So we're going to go through a few of these. I'm going back to calling on people now. When I call on you, I'd like to read I'll have you read one of the sentences and then tell me if you think it's a key idea or a key detail or a minor detail, and then why you think that. And I'm going to try and get back in my list here. Angela Smith, I'm going to start with you. Are you there, Angela?
Yes, I am.
Hi, can you read the first one to us, please?
Angela Duckworth left counseling to teach 7th grade.
All right, Angela, do you think that's a key idea or a minor idea?
It was a minor idea.
Why?
I think it's minor because, yes, it turned her into looking into this further. However, the information that she looked into is just more valuable. There's more meat to it.
Mm-hmm. And what's the topic of her speech?
It was on growth mindset.
Actually, the grit. Yep, the topic of her growth mindset is part of it. But if the topic is grit and the main idea is kind of explaining what grit is, this detail really doesn't refer to grit at all, right? It's giving us more like background knowledge of Angela. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Can you go ahead? I've lost you on the screen. Can you go ahead and mute yourself, please? Jennifer S., are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Jennifer, can you read the second one to us?
Yep. Grit is passion and perseverance for a long-term goal. I think this is a key detail because that was kind of her premise of her talk and instilling this in our students.
Mm-hmm. She's actually defining grit there, right? Yep, I would agree. By the way, as I go through these activities and that kind of thing, I have an idea of what I think is the correct answer, and I do check that with my students. But if they place something wrong, I want them to give me the opportunity to show me their reasoning. because this isn't particularly concrete. There are some times that things could go in both columns. And I think it's more important for the two of us to share our reasoning with each other than it is for my students to produce something that matches my answer key, like exactly, okay? Amanda, I think, is it Christensen?
Yes, Christensen.
Are you there? Okay, I see about half of your last name.
Oh, yep,
okay.
it's Christensen.
Can you go ahead and read our third one to us, please?
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you.
7th graders learn about ratios, decimals, and the area of a parallelogram.
Okay, do you believe that would be a key detail or a minor detail?
I would think it was minor. It wasn't really about that.
Can you tell me more?
Yes, this statement doesn't have anything to do with grit.
Okay, good. Yeah, I would agree. I think this is giving us some background information on Angela and her experiences, but not directly connected to our concept of grit. Okay, let's do one more slide here. Donna McLean, are you there, Donna?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you read the first one on our next slide?
My internet's going in and out here, so let's see. Grit was the main factor in predicting future success.
Okay. Donna, go ahead. Key detail or minor detail?
A key detail, because that's what this whole thing is about, is grit.
Why?
And the fact that I forgot what I was going to say now. Kind of slipped my mind. But
okay,
just the fact that, you know, success is based on grit.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree with you too. I think it is directly connected to the topic and the main idea of her speech. Let's do a couple more. Laura Ott, are you there?
Yes.
Can you read the second one to us?
Excuse me, Duckworth asked, who is successful here and why? I think that's a minor detail. It's just giving some more background information about the study, the information this speaker did.
Okay, and this is one that in my classroom we debated. There was some controversy over this one, which is good because it shows that my students are thinking. When I did the exercise, I actually put that in the key detail because I feel like it is giving us the basis of her research, which is grit. But it doesn't mean that you know, one of us is wrong and one of us is right. We're both reasoning. And that's what's most important, is that our students are developing those reasoning skills. There is a good reason to put that particular detail in either column. All right. Okay, let's try one more. This is Vicky. Vicky, is it Disroot?
Yep.
Are you there, Vicky? Hi. Can you read the last one to us?
Success in life requires more than learning quickly and easily.
Would you consider that to be a key detail or a minor detail?
A key detail?
Why?
It just seems like that was the whole purpose of talking about grit.
Okay, so that the idea of grit is, so grit is a cause of success. Okay. Okay, I don't remember, but I think actually when I did it, I did put it in the other one because it seems like the topic is success and not grit, but I do understand your reasoning that success would be the result, like grit would be the cause and success. Okay, so again,
Yeah,
I think it could go either way, right?
They also need grit, not just the ability to learn quickly and easily.
Got it. And so that conversation that I'm having with Vicki and Laura, that academic conversation where people can model their thought processes, I think there's a lot of value in that. And so then it can transfer over to those reading skills, okay? Because students are beginning to understand that there's more than one way a text could possibly be interpreted. that it isn't always a very concrete right or wrong type of thing. So I'm not going to go through the rest of the slides. I had a lot. But what this does is then it would lead us into the type of test questions where they have to determine whether something is an appropriate summary, okay, of a text. The first one, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all of this, but the first one, we said, no, it wasn't an appropriate summary because this is really more of a background of Angela Duckworth. It's sort of her like professional resume rather than focusing on grit. The second one we said was not a fabulous summary because although at the end she's getting into kind of grit and growth mindset, the first two sentences are including details that we placed in our minor detail column. So it's kind of doing combining both the minor details and the key details. And in a summary, we want to focus on those key details. So then this was an example of an appropriate summary. I'll give you a chance just to read that to yourself for a moment. Okay, so this is the end of our second kind of classroom activity. To change that to something that would work online, I did have to change my paper sort. Rather than sorting things into two categories, I put them in the boxes of 3. And then I really did the best to remind myself to ask students why. So that would prompt that academic conversation and really encourage them to demonstrate their thought process. You can take a couple of minutes on your own to jot down pros or cons, whether or not this would work in a classroom setting, what adjustments you would need to make something appropriate for your students. And I can, if you want to take questions in the chat box, I can take questions while you're jotting down a reflection.
Thank you, Penny. We did have an interesting exchange in the chat box around making thinking visible. I wonder if Christine can speak up while other people are forming their questions or comments about the activity. Christine?
Sure. As some of you know, Lindsay Cermak and I have been doing a lot with making thinking visible, and this is really a perfect example of it. Pushing students past the answer or their answer into why, into their reasoning is really a big deal. And I put in the chat box, it's not just important for the student to articulate the reasoning, but it's really important for fellow classmates, because often what happens is classmates will say, oh my gosh, I never thought about thinking of it that way, or that makes total sense. And it's so important. And also, as I put in the chat box, it puts a lot of the heavy thinking and the lifting on students. I think about when I first started teaching and the times I would say, that's the right answer and this is why, or that's not quite the right answer and this is why it's not. And then realizing that I needed to start asking students, why do you think this is your answer? But you do have to prepare them and let them be transparent and let them know, I'm going to be asking you why. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that I want to get at what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Christine. A couple things. Penny, I just want to direct your attention to a question in the chat from Elizabeth Bennett. She writes, did students write their own summaries as part of this lesson, or would that come later?
No, I handed them all 3 summaries, and then I asked them to identify which one they thought was best and then explain why.
Great, thank you. And then in reference to Christine's comments around making thinking visible, I've chatted out, you'll have to cut and paste it. It isn't a live link, but the first in a series of 4 articles around making thinking visible that Christine and Lindsay wrote for us earlier this year. And then a question around, could this be shared Google Doc where students can type their answers, perhaps in a 3-part table? Have you tried that?
No, I haven't, and the reason is the district that I work in order for students to be on Google Doc, they need to have an email for our district. And I found that out just after they had all gotten established with a Gmail address, and it wasn't worth like having to
Sounds like
get
logistical
everybody
confusion.
on a new,
Yeah.
yeah, it was more of a bureaucratic thing that I just have not done much with Google because of how I have to do it within my district. So I am kind of sticking to Zoom. But those of you who work with Google, go for it.
Yeah.
It gives you an option. Yeah.
Right. It seems like a way that they would have that collaborative space to do some collaborative writing. We did have a question from Marn, and I actually wonder, Marn, if you could unmute and say more, something about explicit versus implicit instruction. Marn, can you tell us more?
Sure. Well, as I was looking at each of the statements and trying to decide whether it's major or minor, just running through my head that the ones that were obviously major included the word grit, which would be very explicit. The ones where I was kind of, well, maybe, maybe not, which I thought were wonderful examples, the connection to grit was subtle, so therefore less explicit, more implicit. I'm just kind of sorting through that in my head.
And there were quite a few slides that we didn't get to, so there are some key detail sentences that don't actually contain the word grit. We just didn't get that far. But yeah, I find myself doing the same thing. At first I have to analyze my thinking to then sort of develop an activity to help students like work on those same reasoning skills. Yeah.
Thanks, Penny.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on. Okay, so the next activity is a way to build those sort of reasoning skills into something that we might already be doing in our routine. So for using evidence-based practices at an intermediate level, we probably have some sort of fluency lesson within our larger class. And the focus still needs to be on the accuracy rate and prosody, but you can add a lot to that fluency lesson at the end of the lesson by really asking one question. And so we're going to work on this. We're going to try this. We are going to do a collaborative oral reading of the book Holes by Sachar. This is one of my favorites. It is a book that is written around a third or a fourth grade reading level, and you can purchase copies of it from Scholastic, among other sources. I like this book because it is written at a level that is very doable for sort of maybe our advanced ELL group or our beginning, intermediate, maybe STAR students. But there is a lot of complexity within the story, even though the language isn't particularly demanding. There are 3 stories that are taking place. There's one main story that appears in the modern time, and then 2 stories from the past. But many details from those stories in the past show up in the modern day story. This is, of all the different books I've used for fluency, this is one of the best for looking for implied ideas and opportunities to inference. I also enjoy using this book because I work with a lot of parents and they do take it and then read it to their children at home as a result of being in class. So we are going to read a portion of one of the minor stories. The setting of that story is in the Old West of a fictional town of Green Lake, Texas. One of the characters is Sam, who is a man who sells onions. Mary Lou is a donkey that pulls his cart, and then Miss Catherine is the school teacher. I will call on you to read some portions of this. As we're reading, the one question that I need you to think about: what details support the idea that Sam is an effective businessman? So this is a free text source, but there are, because it's free, we do need to mess around a little bit with some ads. I will have to close some ads as we get to it. Can I just check, are you seeing the story on your screen?
We are, huh? And Marissa's chatted it PDF in the chat log.
So if people prefer to do it that way. Okay, I'll start us off so we get some modeling in there. And then when I call on you, read a paragraph where you can read two if you want, because they're rather short. And then I'll just, I think today I'll just interrupt and I'll call on you, or I'll call on somebody else when it's their turn to read. Okay, here we go. Onions, sweet, fresh onions, Sam would call, as he and his donkey, Mary Lou, walked up and down the dirt roads of Green Lake. Mary Lou pulled a cart full of onions. Sam's onion field was somewhere on the other side of the lake. Once or twice a week, he would row across the lake and pick a new batch to fill the cart. Sam had big, strong arms, but it would still take all day for him to row across the lake and another day for him to return. Most of the time, he would leave Mary Lou in a shed, which the walkers let him use at no charge. But sometimes he would take Mary Lou on his boat with him. Okay, Megan, are you there? I think is it Megan Himes?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute you. Maybe the next, I'll just go ahead and I'll interrupt, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sam claimed that Mary Lou was almost 50 years old, which was, and still is, extraordinarily old for a donkey. She eats nothing but raw onions, Sam would say, holding up a white onion between his dark fingers. It's nature's magic vegetable. If a person ate nothing but raw onions, he could live to be 200 years old. Sam was not much older than 20, so nobody was quite sure that Mary Lou was really as old as he said she was. How would he know? Still, nobody ever argued with Sam, and whenever they were sick, they would go not only to Doc Hawthorne, but also to Sam. Sam always gave the same advice: eat plenty of onions.
Thank you, Megan. Andrea Reeves, are you there?
Yes.
Can you continue? Let me raise the text a little bit here.
Okay.
And I'll see if I can get rid of this ad. Okay, can you continue, please?
Sure. He said that onions were good for the digestion, the liver, the stomach, the lungs, the heart, and the brain. If you don't believe me, just look at old Mary Lou here. She's never been sick a day in her life. He also had many different ointments, lotions, syrups, and pastes, all made out of onion juice and different parts of the onion plant. This one cured asthma, that one was for warts and pimples, another was a remedy for arthritis. He even had a special ointment which he claimed would cure baldness. Just rub it on your husband's head every night when he's sleeping, Mrs. Collingwood, and soon his hair will be as thick and long as Mary Lou's tail. Doc Hawthorne did not resent Sam. The folks of Green Lake were afraid to take chances. They would get regular medicine from Doc Hawthorne and onion concoctions from Sam. After they got over their illness, no one could be sure, not even Doc Hawthorne, which of the two treatments had done the trick. Doc Hawthorne was almost completely bald, and in the morning his head often smelled like onions.
All right, I think we can stop it there. I'll leave the text up on our main screen, and instead of doing our second breakout room, I think we're just going to do this one kind of as another chat discussion. Because I do want to give us a chance to do some networking here at the end of our session. So the question is, what details in the text that we read support the idea that Sam is an effective businessman? So I see he developed a personal relationship with his clients. Okay. That would be a question that I could follow up on and ask, so why do you think that? And that would prompt a student to give us more details. Onions are a cure for everything. People go to the doctor and to Sam. Okay. He has marketing skills. I like the word claimed. We use that word a lot in my class. So, okay. All right, so we kind of understand that activity. It is a delightful story. And in fact, in the next chapter, it moves on to, there's a love story involved. So if you're looking for something to read later, I would recommend Holes. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're not going to go further with that activity. What I am going to do is share my screen again here. So if that's an activity that you're interested in or you're looking for something to do online, here's a link to this was a portion of the book, it wasn't the whole book. And okay, so kind of wrapping up that activity to turn it into something online, I did need to either distribute books to students at home or to locate an online source that we could read from. But it didn't involve prep. Once I kind of understood one of the ideas that's being implied, it really is just adding one question at the end of a fluency lesson and then to generate that discussion. So feel free to jot down any reflection, pros, cons, adjustments if you would do something like this in your classroom, and I can take a few questions and answers.
And I'll just remind everyone that you can raise your hand when you're in the participants tab there. You can raise your hand and Penny will be able to call on you.
Penny Leaf in Mankato mentions it's great to have a PDF reading that's a little longer, and she thanks you for those resources.
Thank you.
Kelly mentioned she loves the reflection components for discussion and the promotion of listening.
Okay, let's move on. I'm not going to do this activity, but I just wanted to put it up here to give you an example of how this, that idea of how details support an implied idea can be used with more complex text. So we took the poem, "Oh Captain, My Captain," and in my traditional class, I cut it into separate lines. Each student got a line from the poem, and then they had to tell me, did the line that they received, did that support the idea that the captain was a well-respected person? So if we take a look, the first few lines in the first stanza of the poem are really about the boat. There isn't anything here that is specifically talking about the captain, but towards the end, especially when we get into the second and the third stanzas, we have like, "Here, Captain, dear father," okay? We begin to have details that are pointing to the fact that this reaction that the crowd has isn't just for the ship, but it's also because they have respect for the captain of that ship. And then we did a little bit of discussion of the historical context and how the captain is representing Abraham Lincoln and the ship, the United States, and we did that as well, okay? Okay, one other activity we're going to do here is, again, working on the reasoning skills, and this is really to help build comprehension of the persuasive text, working on the essay that students need to do for the GED Reasoning Through Language Arts test. I worked with them on the idea of developing whether a detail supports, contradicts, or is irrelevant to a key idea. Supporting is giving further example or clarification. Contradict is actually arguing the counterclaim. And then irrelevant would be something that really isn't connected to the topic or the main idea. So this was, oh, there, I just said what I was going to say. Okay. So this is how I defined those 3 words for my students. In my traditional classroom, this was something that was in a sort, and so then they would get a card or a detail, and then they would have to put it in one of the 3 columns. But if the main idea of something is that social media benefits society, okay, then I pulled different statements that might appear in a paragraph. And for example, the first one, Mark Zuckerberg is the founder of Facebook, is probably something that is rather irrelevant. It's loosely connected to social media, but it really isn't describing a benefit. 25% of college admissions officers check applicants' social media site. Let me think, is that a benefit or irrelevant? I kind of think it could go either way, but if I'm looking at just the words and not extrapolating from them, it might be slightly irrelevant. I'm not sure that it's telling us for certain that it's a benefit. I would have to infer that, okay? But social media helps citizens help other people. It has the word in there, help, twice, okay? So that's a pretty good indication that this is talking about benefiting social media. Okay. Let's try just a few more on here. Carol Jones, are you there? Carol? Okay, let me find somebody else. Amy, are you there? Oops, I still have you muted, sorry.
Oh, yep, I'm here.
Yeah, and it's Van Steen something. Do I have the right Amy?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, again, I only see half of your name on my screen. That's okay. Can you read, I might even have you try the next 3. So can you read the middle one for us, the first one in the middle row?
Law enforcement uses social media to catch criminals.
Okay, would you consider that detail supporting, contradictory, or irrelevant to the idea that social media benefits society? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I have, so I would not consider that very beneficial.
Okay. So Amy, I'm going to ask you, can you tell me more? Can you explain your thinking
yeah,
a little more?
I think that that's more of an invasion of privacy, and so the negative impacts of sort of targeting people in that particular way outweigh the benefits.
Good, Amy, if I had money, I would pay you right now because often that's a little bit of a response that I get from my students, and there isn't anything wrong with the response. But one of the things that that reasoning through language arts really trains us to do is to take a little bit of our personal background, opinion, and view out of it and look more at the evidence. And so if you were my student who told me that, I would explain, yeah, I see where you're thinking, and I think you're bringing some of your experiences into it. Put your experiences aside, and if we just look at this, would law enforcement using something, would that benefit society? I think there's a way we could argue both ways there, okay? And we're fine with that. Now, I myself would probably call that a benefit, but it's not necessarily wrong, and you're not necessarily wrong. And the activity isn't really so much that you and I agree and have an identical perspective, but it's more that we have an opportunity to discuss our reasoning behind it, okay? Let's try another one. Sherilyn, let me unmute you. Sherilyn, are you there?
Penny, I'm just going to interrupt with a time check. It is 11:30. So if we need to move on, if people need to leave and have other things, we certainly understand. If you're able to hang with us for a couple more minutes while we wrap up, we would love that too. Thank you.
Yeah, and we are at 11:30. I am so sorry. Okay, so we are not going to get to our we're not going to get to our, our sharing on the whiteboard. Thanks for pointing that out, Patsy. Okay. That's the final activity. Of course, when we do stuff online, it does tend to take longer than it does in the traditional classroom. So I apologize for not monitoring the time a little bit better, but we can go ahead and fast forward here through things. I think, Patsy, at this point, I think I can just turn it back over to you to sort of do the closing feedback request and closing slides and all of that.
Sure, great. Well, I just want to thank Penny for her excellent presentation this morning and all of the great ideas. There was a lot of chatter in the chat box, and I know people were really engaged in the small groups and in the various activities that were shared. And I appreciate her ability to take this from a Language and Literacy Institute presentation that was in person and make it into an online format, and then also add to it a layer of how to do this with your students when you're not able to see them in person. So thank you for your innovation and your willingness to jump into this work, Penny. We would love in the chat box or in an email follow-up if you have any ideas on how Atlas might continue to support you in your work during this time. So we really appreciate any ideas that you have. We'll of course continue to have those coffee breaks and other webinars that are scheduled. But if you have something that you would really like to see from us, let us know what that is. And I think there might be a couple of slides just to make sure people know how to stay in touch. Penny, if you want to proceed.
The PowerPoint will be made available for anybody who wants to see it, and my contact information is on the title slide. The bibliography for all of the curriculum sources will also be on that PowerPoint.
Great, thank you, Penny. Penny, can you move the slide forward?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Okay. Okay.
Great. I just want to give people a reminder, if you're interested in joining us a week from right now, we will be working on an exciting new adventure for us, which is to put a summit online. So we were going to meet in person for the day on May 8th. Instead, we're going to meet for a half day for learning. If you're working with CCRS instructional leadership in your program in any capacity, or if that's something that you would like to move into in your program, we hope you'll join us, and you can go to the Atlas events calendar to register for that event. We hope some of you will be able to join us. Lots of CCRS work happening in this webinar. If this is something you're doing a lot of in your program and are helping your colleagues with, please join us for that event. And go ahead to the next one.
Okay.
And just a reminder of some upcoming coffee breaks on the 4th. We've got Andrea again for an ESL one, and then English Language Arts with Christine, and then Andrea and her colleagues from Literacy Minnesota working on using volunteers during these distance times. A handful of webinars are coming up as well, so be sure and tune in to the events calendar and the ABE Connect newsletter coming to your inbox on Tuesdays to get all of the details for those. And go ahead and proceed to the next slide, Amy, Penny. And then there's a Schoology Site. I think people probably already know about this one, so I won't dwell here, but we will be sure to include this in a follow-up. Perhaps we can, Marisa, if you can make a note to include this code so that people who aren't yet connected to the Schoology group can get connected. This is the place where people are sharing ideas and resources and questions at the moment. So be sure and join us there. And there might be one more, let's see. Yeah, just a reminder about those newsletter articles and of course the resources on the Atlas website. If you haven't been there recently, do visit the atlasabe.org and take a look at the newsletter. If you're not currently getting it, that's where you can register to get that every Tuesday. And then we do have a resource center online as well. Oh, and Marisa actually put in the chat how to get into the Schoology group. Thank you, Marisa.
Okay, and there's the list of the resources. Thank you for attending. My hope is that you got something that may work in your classroom, whatever your classroom looks like at this point. I will stay on, so if you have further questions or comments or that kind of thing, I'll be available, or you can email me. My email address is on the first slide of the PowerPoint. Otherwise, you may go and have a nice weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you so much. And I thank Penny for her work on this, and everyone behind the scenes, Marisa, Gail, and Christine, for making this all happen so smoothly. So appreciate it. And if any of the hosts want to turn their cameras on for a moment so we can just say hello, that would be great. We don't get to see each other's faces very much. There they are. So thank you so much to Team Atlas and to Penny for putting this together for us today. Thank you. We'll
Thanks,
hang out for a
everyone.
couple minutes if people have additional questions.